101. Charles. My blood had run cold and sweat was slowly trailing down my spine as I desperately tried to force the system to acknowledge the commands. The situation was critical. I might not be the biggest fan of the gods, but their power was unquestionable. The gap between us was insurmountable, even more so if I couldn't ascend to at least semi-divinity. That was why I felt a sense of relief when a blue window appeared before me. It was a flickering, stuttering thing, but it was there. A Ask Ascension system, initializing. People, please wait. Nonetheless, I felt the pang of panic as the system slowly unfurled. I could see its tendrils burrowing into my soul thanks to the newly gained clarity. Normally, it should be a horrifying, violating, vomit-inducing experience. For better or worse, I had recently experienced something even more traumatic, so my threshold for horror had risen remarkably. Not to mention, I had other, bigger problems, like, for example, a mad goddess breathing down my neck. Yanders were cool until one tried to stab you. Focusing on the present, I took a quick look at my status, even as I felt the force of change purring into life. It was a slow and steady start, akin to an ancient machine shaking off the rust that clung to its every part. But it was happening. Name, Charles. Level. Oh. Class, Master of Tainted Flame. Title, Dungeon Lord of Twin Soul, Aspiring Demigod. Abilities, Fiery Soul, Quick Casting, Dungeon Connection, Dung and on Influence, Dung and #caret, *#, exclamation point, close parenthesis, #_. The panel was garbled, but I had seen worse. At least a section for my race didn't appear, so I was supposedly still a pure-blooded human. Normally I would chuckle at that, but the rise in surrounding mana left little time for humor. Soon its concentration would reach a saturation too large, even for the dungeon's walls to contain. People and even monsters wouldn't be able to survive contact with this concentrated power. I had my link to the core to thank for even having an option to stall. Otherwise, I would already be down for the count, trying desperately to process the incoming mana while radiating the undigested scraps all around me. And that was only a preparation part, the softening of my flesh for the incoming ascension into a divinity. That gave me another insight into why there weren't many, if any, divinities left on Yana. Well, demi-divinities, semi-divinities. Anyway, what I wanted to say was that the process of ascension was too damn volatile, too user-unfriendly. My options were limited. One way to avoid complications was to deceive the world that it was Forgotten Dungeon's ascension, not mine. There was, however, one big fat problem with doing just that. The dungeon's core was supposed to be completely destroyed, with only dredges of its basic functionality remaining, barely enough to keep the place running. If normal cores were like personal computers, repeating the same lines of simple code, then Silver Oasis was supposed to rule over something resembling an abacus, and abacuses don't ascend. That was a weird comparison. Anyway, my train of thought had been cut short as an ominous blue window appeared in the corner of my eye. 5 o'clock, 4:59, 4:58. A timer? It looked like I had about 5 minutes to get my affairs in order. It wasn't long enough, but beggars can't be choosers. And while the wheels of change were turning, I was worried about quite a few things. The battle between elves and the Lich and a powerful signature rushing from the north were amongst the most important. But stashing both Agnes and my people somewhere safe came close second. I sighed before squaring my shoulders. There were contingencies to be made, work to be delegated. Now, what could I do? Well, the first part was easy. I had to evacuate Silver Oasis's residence downstairs, then ask Non to protect me during the ascent. After that came recalling the monsters deeper underground. That last action would be tricky, but at the same time, a welcome change. With the newly gained control over the dungeon, I could mold it nearly instantly. It was not free, however. There was a steep cost in mana. At least that problem was temporarily easy to deal with, as I started siphoning any remains of my ascension process into the dungeon's coffers. As a bonus, it seemed like the system couldn't decide which limits were to be enforced, ones designed for the dungeon cores or sentient beings. So in truly broken fashion, none were in place. All the better for me. "Adam!" I bellowed, creating a sudden commotion, as people realized my presence. "Adam, I need you here." My white-haired butler sprang out of the crowd with a speed that did not suit his age. Agnes, Master Vincent, and a few of the trusted officers were following closely behind him. Despite his supposedly low level, he arrived first and without a trace of fatigue. The old man straightened his back, returning to his persona, while only the tightening of his eyes betrayed the emotions behind the mask. Young master, he stammered before catching himself. There was hesitation in his tone. Are you all right? Do you feel okay? I paused, noticing the reaction. My brows furrowed as I searched for some reflective surface before sighing and stilling. How unnecessary. I forgot that was in the middle of my domain. With a flex of will, a small handheld mirror had been summoned, fitting snugly in my palm. The crowd around me sighed with emotion, reacting to frankly a paltry trick. What? How? Young master. My oldest servant forcibly calmed down before continuing, a trace of a smile returning to his face. I see. I'm glad that your endeavor was, in the end, successful. Congratulations. Adam bowed deeply, even as his eyes continued their roaming. I ignored his attention, more focused on unexpected changes to my body. A face different from usual greeted me in the silvery mirror. Parts of my hair had turned black, with my eyes pretty much completely consumed by darkness. A single pinprick of green light burned violently in both pupils. There was also a certain gauntness to my skin now, creating a more solemn and austere image than usual. I scratched my chin before shrugging. At least my clothes stayed the same. Thank you. You don't need to worry. I am still myself, Adam. I flashed a smile. It's just that power has its price, one that had been paid in full, I added mysteriously. I really didn't want to talk about the battle in the goop cave, or the devouring that happened after. It felt dirty, inhuman. My trusted butler clenched his teeth before bowing down stiffly. Forgive this old fool. I have failed in my task. I wasn't strong enough, wasn't smart enough to save you. Save me? I asked, not understanding. You are no longer human, aren't you, Master? Both Agnes and Master Vincent nodded their heads in solemn silence. Technically, I still am. I disagreed, but my joke fell on deaf ears. I sighed, noticing both his and Agnes's reddening eyes. Master Vincent just looked intrigued. Figures. My girlfriend, on the other hand, was holding her dainty hand near her mouth in melodramatic fashion. I squinted. Why are you acting surprised, Agnes? According to Adam, we're the same now. You should rejoice. No more whispers about half-bloods. She glared at me for a long moment before stepping forward to engulf me in a hug. Spoil sport, fool. Why do you always want to carry all the burdens? I don't need you to protect me. I need you alive. She whispered as I hugged her back. I wanted to drown in her heat and voice, to forget what needed to be done, but no, the time was running out. Isn't that what you did too? I asked clippily before relenting. There was no need for scuffles. Soon the rest of the power that Uno promised will arrive, and I'll completely cease being human. I muttered, my mouth filled with Agnes's hair. I predict that the transition will be violent. There may be some obstacles too. To avoid the aftershocks, I intend to send you all underground. The rooms are already being prepared. I lied. Technically, the order wasn't yet given. Dungeon, stone, and magic will shield you. What? No! She scowled. I won't let you fight alone. You can't. I didn't add that her strength was not enough. We both knew it. I'll return victorious, you'll see. As she whimpered in my ear, acting like a spoiled princess, I focused on my secondary cores. They were a part of me now, a part of my power, and so I channeled them into creating a most expedient way to the third floor, a slide. I made it from gleaming black obsidian, which had a bonus quality of eliminating any snags on the way down. The completely black tunnel looked like an entrance to hell, but contrary to its looks, it was exceedingly safe. My will pierced through the rock, separating the dungeon's levels, and obliterated anything that stood in the way of my newest creation. Then, as soon as its nozzle opened on the lowest of my floors, I moved to start the excavation. The floor had a bare minimum already, but these were asylum rooms, not places for humans to live. So, instead of changing the existing structure, my power had been funneled into disintegrating large chunks of stone. Then, in a flourish, the dungeon's presence retreated. It seemed like too much mana was unhealthy for those who weren't my denizens. Who knew? Seconds later, I gazed at the freshly dug out cavern, full of pride, only to observe as it collapsed on itself. Ah, right. Despite not being shackled by the dungeon's normal rules, I still had no fucking idea about architecture. Sure, I knew words, load bearing, arches, foundations, and all other stuff. What did they mean, though? To that, I was blind. Usually, I would just shore that deficiency with magic. At least the solution was easy. When in doubt, delegate. With a quick twist, I condensed some of my power into an artifact. Imagination was important for the shape, so I chose a humble drill. For the denizens of this world, it was an enigma. For me, it carried an unspoken romance. Well, it wasn't like my knowledge about drills was that profound, but as a form suitable to carry the power I designed, it was good enough. I condensed 3 of such items. Why 3? It was just a nice number. Each of them was given to a ratling with a penchant for digging. They instantly became something akin to celebrities, with mobs of rats following their every word. After my orders were delivered, they and their minor wannabes were promptly ignored. 2 minutes remained. I hissed, turning my attention to the 2 higher floors. If an apocalyptic scenario that I predicted really was going to happen, then the residents of these places would be turned into ash. Or worse, twisted into something unfit to live. Normally, I would be powerless to intervene. The calcification effect of the dungeon was already taking place. They were not mine to command anymore. Instead, they followed the arbitrary rules of the floor. Or so would it be, normally. Right now, my enhanced mind cut through their control threads like they were mere cobwebs. The creatures stilled, lacking the usual guidance before turning to panic. For the first time in their lives, they were free, and they were not happy at all. I sighed and sent a message before they started a rampage. Follow the rats and does to the lowest floor. They will lead you. They will protect you, and you will protect my people. Many of the creatures were not intelligent enough to understand what I was talking about, but the infusion of meaning took care of that. Soon an exodus happened, as the undead, monsters, and even bile-brained golems were slowly making their way downstairs, and for the first time in ever, the production of Libir exploders had stilled to a stop. My job was done. Or so I thought, but there was a small buzzing in the corner of my mind, like I forgot about something important. Oh, Ogrekin. They were too large to fit into the slide and too stupid to survive on their own. I could resize the slide, but their sheer mass would squash anyone not fast enough to get out of their way. So instead of doing that, I simply sent another rat contingent to lead them. With Guardian and his kobolds also retreating, they were the perfect force to sweep any stragglers downstairs. The staircases were barely adequate to contain Ogrekin bulk, and I wasn't sure they'll escape fast enough to avoid the fallout. But it was the best I could do for them. After all, they were a precious sample of dungeon-enhanced humans. It would be a shame to lose them. As the seconds began to tick down, I understood that most of the Silver Oasis residents would be evacuated after my ascension started. It was an unpleasant truth. Clenching my teeth, I made a few more slides and focused on Agnes, still clinging to me tightly. "Love, you need to go," I whispered. "The mana will start leaking soon, and then only Non would be able to withstand it." The former revenant quietly stood in the background, her new flesh and power under strict control. "I don't wanna," my fiancée whined, her golden eyes staring into mine. "It's not fair." "Now you know how I felt when you left to fulfill your duties," I teased. "The roles are reversed, and I promise you that I'll return intact, just like you promised me before." Agnes pouted for a long moment before relenting. She planted a long, sloppy kiss on my lips before whispering, "Don't forget about me." Her glare swept over nearby Non, and suddenly things clicked in my mind. I wanted to chuckle. Jealousy was such a weird thing. "I wouldn't dare. Now go, my love. Things out here are going to get nuclear." As she retreated, I focused on the blue window, summoning it to the middle of my vision. The rest of the time passed quickly. With a jolt of pain, the words changed, and at the same time, I felt full. I had been filled to the capacity with mana, and then there was a ping, and suddenly everything around me turned muted, as if I was perceiving the world through layers and layers of gauze. It was a certain detachment, a forcible separation. My senses sharpened. I could feel the sudden anger of the elves as they noticed my change, the calm loyalty of Non, and a feeling of maddening glee radiating out of the lich battling the gilded angels. Pre-ascension procedures completed, parsing available data. Data parsed. Welcome, demigod of chaos and transformation. Parsing perceived level. Perceived level set to 80. Excellent compatibility detected with the domain of chaos. Good compatibility detected with the domain of transformation. Collating data. Injecting data. A jolt of pain elicited a hiss from my mouth. My claws twisted for a moment, and the tail stilled as an automatic reaction. I scratched the unruly scales on my chest. The tentacles on my head swirled for a moment, too, their suckers and poison swirling underneath the fleshy surface. All of my 12 eyes blinked. Then the sensation passed, and I could breathe again. The delicate skin and white teeth were back, and yet I knew that underneath all that was human, now another layer of power stilled and waited for a command. I was not in control, but at the same time, I was bursting with power. The windows didn't wait for me to think, however. Data injection completed. Elevating existence. Attaching existence to the idea construct. Error. Idea construct already present. Connection to dungeon core detected. Connection to flesh avatar detected. Connection to secondary soul detected. Connection to outworld soul detected. Error. Escalating the error to the administrator. Escalation unsuccessful. Parsing additional solutions. System ego notified. System ego responding. Please wait. Was that who I thought it was? Fuck. You're already here? Good. Let's talk. Fuck indeed. 102. Charles. As soon as the blue window with incongruous text disappeared, something had changed. There was an unexpected heaviness in the air. The battle stopped, and people, animals, and monsters stood in absolute silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then came a crack, and the skies had split open, allowing a violent color to seep in. The wound in reality shredded the blue horizon, while we all watched in horror as something out of this world forced its way into the present. Gangria's arrival was a thing of awe and bottomless eldritch fear. The monstrously powerful presence I had noticed before far in the north was her indeed. For better or worse, she turned up right above my dungeon. And in the wake of her passing, the world twisted. Despite my, now supposedly insanely high level, I was getting chills. The battle between Lich, Elves, and Non came to a standstill as soon as Gangria appeared, fully clad in her divinity. The sheer weight of her presence stupefied even the most powerful and directly erased many of the lesser monsters and people. It was at this moment that I understood what it meant for a goddess of life and death to descend on the material plane, especially if there was a bit too much of death in her supposedly dual-aspected divinity. At the same time, I was damn glad that the evacuation had already finished, as her raw power, her vitriol, were currently seeping into the dungeon's upper levels and the surrounding landscape. And oh boy, seeing the effect of such power, I sure would prefer to not experience a Fallout wasteland without there even being a nuclear war. The trees, sundews, and other dungeon flora were either burned into ash or managed to survive by the skin of their teeth, twisted beyond recognition. What remained screamed for death, filled with endless suffering. The silver peeled away from my creations with speed that would be comedic if not for what emerged from underneath. The cancerous growths covered places where branch and bark had ruled earlier, pulsating with unholy energy while seeping wads of pus-like substance that corrupted the ground. Surrounding fauna mostly managed to escape, with only a few of the slowest and stupidest creatures being forced to straddle the line between abomination and death. Those fighting were taken by surprise and fared much worse, but each of the factions had managed to shield the bulk of their troops. The Lich retreated into its camp, with a bunch of undead and various monsters following in its footsteps. There had to be some additional wards present there, but even so, its ice shield was straining under ungodly pressure. At the same time, elven angels returned to their flying fortress. Their losses were the greatest, as only a sliver of wingless warriors were fast enough to avoid the divine pollution. The rest died explosive deaths, as if something in their very nature couldn't coexist with Gangria's powers. Those blessed with wings fled the fastest, and thus most of them managed to survive. Silver Oasis forces had been sheltered by Non, whose giant Taijitu diagram created a haven. It was, however, not only her might alone sustaining it, I also pumped monstrous amounts of mana to stabilize the defenses. At least Valkyrie's barrier was able to convert part of the two-headed goddess's might into her own. How very Xianxia of her. "Are you going to ignore me much longer?" Gangria hissed, seeing I wasn't paying attention. Her impatience was like a kick to the balls. I wouldn't dare. I smiled while trying to rein in my emotions and facial expression. I thought our last meeting was bad. I was wrong, and it was so much worse now. In the past, I was merely a fly, a molecule of dust drifting about. To not completely liquefy my soul, body, and mind, Gangria decided on a less intimidating vessel, or so I assumed. After all, her earlier avatar was composed of two similar-looking girls. Now, now I was forced to perceive her battle form, a two-headed dragon, a beast of an unimaginable power, who floated loftily over the freshly created dead zone. Her scales gleamed with jade green and dusk-like dark, the color of life and death intertwining in a dance of endless agony. Both of her heads had heterochromic eyes in keeping with her earlier style. One of them was black and the other green. She sighed, seeing my dumbfounded face, and prepared to land. The moment she did so, the scarred surface stirred into life, even the barely alive abominations suddenly regenerating their flesh and skin. Some even returned to their former shapes, or so it seemed at first glance. The corroding, monstrous power of death now beat inside them, waiting to explode at the lightest touch. Like an overloaded nuclear reactor, they were already dead. Omae wa mu shinderu. The three factions surrounded the place of Gangria's landfall, each of us warily eyeing the competition. And yet the goddess didn't care. She was silent and focused. It would be cute, maybe even interesting, if I weren't the sole target of that focus. Normally, that would be my cue to run. Yet, to make matters worse, I was currently immobilized, held in place by systems ascension procedure. Talk about bad luck and unmoving targets. As soon as Gangria's draconic body touched the ground, a profound transformation took place. Her overwhelming power receded like it had been just an illusion, and a flash of light brightened our surroundings. When our eyes recovered, standing nearby were two familiar figures. The vessels that the two-headed goddess used earlier now stared at me with their expressionless faces and innocent eyes. Despite the sudden lack of pressure, I knew that I had no chance in direct battle. The newly gained strength allowed me to feel the gulf between us even more keenly. I idly wondered if the Lich or his elven opponents were feeling the same existential dread, or maybe their lower levels spared their self-esteem. The twin goddess didn't give me more time to think. Her vessels stepped closer, with flowers blooming under their feet. They would be beautiful, if not for the fact that I was currently shitting my pants. Figuratively, of course. This should be... The right one started. Much better, right? As the left one finished the sentence. I nearly forgot about that tick of hers. Still, the goddess didn't wait for a response. Now let's... Suddenly she was much closer, her heterochromic eyes observing me with a fervent gaze of a scientist staring at an interesting experiment. Look at you properly. Not human, she murmured, but not a beast either. Curious. There was a second of silence. A wielder of outside power. A pause. And a demigod. The examination continued, and I shuddered under her cold, inhuman fingers tracing lines in my flesh. The subdued power I felt before now twisted and twirled like tentacles of an eldritch entity ready to pounce. I could feel her searching for sources of my power, my convictions, and the lines of karma that radiated from them. It was a humbling, painful, trauma-inducing experience, and something I resisted with all my being. A part of me so silent and malleable I had nearly forgotten about its existence, flared to life in response. The anima stirred, like a beast awoken, all the while reaffirming my identity. It forced me to remember my past decisions. It anchored my fleeing sanity. I was Charles. I was also Uno. The names were more than a designation, both a price and a color of living. I was a lover and a husband. I was a virgin and a loner. Our connections were like lines between equals, a way to stay afloat. I was a man stolen from my time. I was a warrior trying to protect what was important, and the identity was the duty to be defended, a place to call home, a drone, a mage, a dual composite of otherworldly and mundane. Just like her. Gangria staggered back, her expressionless eyes widening a notch at sudden resistance. A drop of understanding colored her icy cold visage, and yet she didn't stop. The goddess dug deeper. What was my first memory? Who were the parents that I treasured? My first love, my passions, my most celebrated victory, my loneliest moment. The questions came and went. I responded in doubles. Sometimes the memory twisted, becoming one. A lack was filled with meaning, freely drawing from both of our lives. Sometimes my mind broke as schizophrenia took hold, two minds fighting for dominance. Sometimes the raw emotion we felt cooled that battle into a ceasefire. In those few minutes, I had been tortured, torn apart, analyzed, and then put back together, but I held. I didn't break completely. When my sight returned, nothing had changed. The place where once Silver Oasis stood was still in the middle of blooming and dying, with not even ruins remaining. I felt the corruption seeping into the dungeon as my subcores fought for survival. Gangria was still here, silently staring into my eyes, and ice explosions were filling the air. Wait, what? Why was the Lich desperately attacking the goddess's barrier? The undead's blue eyes burned with mad purpose as spell after spell splashed helplessly against the shield that the two-headed goddess erected. Despite the lack of reaction, it was giving its all, and I couldn't understand why. Stop it! Stop torturing him, you damnable machine! You mistake! Whore of the old gods! It screamed in the olden tongue. You will not get him! He is my experiment! My redemption! Mine! The Lich was alone. In its hurry, the icy barrier over its camp that had barely withstood Gangria's show of power had dissipated, and the ones hidden within had been routed. The living ones, anyway. While orcs and goblins ran north, the rest of the undead mindlessly followed their leader, while backlash from its attacks was quickly reducing their numbers. Only a few relatively high-level undead remained, and even they were barely standing. It didn't deter the Lich in the slightest, as it continued its tantrum. In the end, Gangria turned her impassive eyes toward the undead. Within a moment, she stepped closer, and the skeleton had been forced to kneel by a sheer weight of her presence, and yet it still thrashed about, all the while screaming its non-existent lungs out. The vessel twin spoke. A curious being, one whispered, undead, and yet not filled with unredeemable hate. Second one added, a monster with purpose. She smiled, and I could see the curiosity building in her eyes. What are you made of? Her hand plunged into the undead's chest, fingers curling around the bluish gem embedded between its ribs. Speak. To me. The Lich wheezed. It tried to struggle, but no mortal or immortal was strong enough to break the grip of a god. Slowly, ever so slowly, a fog of blue-colored mana escaped the gem and surrendered to the twins. Seconds passed before Gangria relaxed her hand. The Lich fell to the ground, wounded but alive. Or whatever the undeath equivalent was, its bones were cracked once again. So many curious pawns. The goddess spoke. On this battlefield of fate. Lich King of Despair, or as you were once called. Leon Walzer, the older brother, mentor, and betrayer of Henrik Walzer. A misunderstood man who tried his best to become an obstacle in his beloved brother's path. To pave a way for Henrik to become the hero his people needed. The teacher who killed his younger kin as a part of the ultimate test, and by doing so, smothered any hope of stopping the wastes from encroaching on the kingdom. Such, she closed her eyes, delicious soul. All this redemption, self-loathing, madness, all bound in the service of creating another champion. The girls looked at the cowering undead with a strange, nearly motherly expression. And yet you failed once again. The twins chorused with a childish glee. That did force a rise out of the undead. I did not fail. Here he stands. Behold. The Lich pointed in my direction while slowly getting up from its knees. I succeeded. My way was the right one. My theory was sound. Only those who overcame adversity are worthy of ascension. I had created a demigod, a being that will lead what remains of humanity. A savior. You will not take him away from me. With my servants and his power will conquer back the wastes, stop the false worship among the monster tribes, and return gods to their rightful place. I will succeed. I will not let you stop me. Despite its grandiose speech, I could sense that something was wrong. There was pity in Gangria's eyes. You poor deluded fool. The goddess shook her head. There's nothing human remaining in this demigod anymore. You lie, the undead screamed with madness-brightened eyes. I had succeeded. The sacrifices I had made, they cannot be in vain. It cannot be otherwise. The universe is not so cruel, he added quietly. See for yourself, then. Allow idea construct, dungeon, show status. Her last words were strange, alien, and at the same time commanding. The world stilled, and a second later, the system responded. Retrying, attaching existence to the idea construct. Attachment successful. Dungeon codename. Forgotten dungeon attached. Shifting the dungeon's nature. And then a holographic window appeared for all to see. With my status window. Name, Charles on level. Class, Master of Tainted Flame. Lord of the Forgotten Dungeon. Race, Dungeon Embodiment. Title, Dungeon Lord of Twin Soul. Demigod of Chaos. Demigod of Transformation. Abilities, Fiery Soul. Quick Casting, Dungeon Connection, Dungeon Influence, Dungeon Control. A second later, a window visible to only me appeared, flickering, as if it was hesitating. I nearly ignored its appearance, if not for the newly gained clarity. Consolidating abilities, Dungeon Connection, Dungeon Influence, Dungeon Control. Fused ability gained, Haven Management. The silence was so loud you could hear a pin drop. The Gangria's eyes were weird. I would expect glee, schadenfreude, or maybe even the earlier seen pity. Instead, she looked on the undead with indifference, calculation, and yet it wasn't her I was currently worried about. The Lich? Or should I just call him Leon Walzer? Leon trembled, his blue eyes piercing me with silent accusation. Even through the goddess's shield, I could no longer consider him a faceless undead. There was a tragedy here, a story of redemption and failure. Ah ha 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 ha! He suddenly screamed, laughing like a madman. All for naught, all lost, all my work, my sacrifice, my lost comrades, my brother's death, all for naught. We observed the outburst in silence. His skull suddenly twisted in Gangria's direction. Goddess. He spoke, suddenly calm. Was there ever a chance that my plan could work? Not in the time. She sighed. We have left. So it could work. Leon's eyes started to glow with familiar madness, and suddenly I remembered what Non told me about the dead. A great obsession was needed for them to keep coherent, and truth or reality had no sway over them. The way ahead is clear then. He stood up before turning completely toward me. I will erase my mistake and try anew. Yes, it is not a waste. It's a part of learning. Goddess, grant me this boon! Leon screamed. Let me fight this demigod of yours! Let me atone! Gangria's reaction was strange. Instead of replying, she turned to me and spoke. Show me, what are you made of? And if you're worthy to keep alive. Her eyes glinted with unspoken threat. The system tendrils disappeared as she finished speaking, and I floated down to the ground, only for the barrier to immediately expel me outside. At least with the empowered body, I didn't faceplant on the ground. That would be embarrassing. Of course, I had bigger problems than embarrassment. Like a friendly neighborhood lich barreling closer with each second, while spewing out hatred and magic. Now, despite the odds being in my favor, there was something weird about the whole situation. I just couldn't put my finger on it. I shrugged. The green flames came nearly unbidden, slithering up my chest like they were a living thing. The dungeon underneath me trembled as my mana cleansed Gangria's corruption and slowly started rebuilding what was lost. I could feel humans, beastkin, and my faithful monsters huddling on the lower levels. This was a battle I couldn't afford to lose. 103. Charles. I glared at my opponent, the verdant green covering me like a protective membrane. I wanted to fight, to kill, to show the world my power. And yet, before letting loose, something scratched against the anger flaring in my mind, a small voice whispering why. Normally, I would have ignored the doubts, as deep thinking didn't help with winning battles. Normally, that is. This situation was anything but normal, and because of that, I stopped. My flames stilled in confusion at the sudden inaction. The twin green snakes hovering over my shoulders hissed and purred, nearly self aware, distinct, and almost alive. Something wasn't adding up. In the background, I could still hear Gangria egging me on, ordering me to deal with the problem. The new possibilities nearly drowned me in choices. It was a refreshing, empowering thing to be on the offensive, for the first time in what felt like forever, with the freshly baked level 80 system reinforced power. And yet, as a demigod standing against what? A level 40 or 50 monster, even if it was a unique one. Where was the excitement in that? It was just bullying the weak. I could just slap Leon and break his neck. It would be easy, barely an inconvenience. But as I took a few first steps to do just that, a thought struck, freezing me in place. The way that two-headed goddess spoke. What did she say? What concrete words were used? I remembered, and the doubts started gnawing on my spine. Maybe it wasn't as simple a problem to deal with as I thought. Maybe it was a test, a way to gauge how a new divinity would behave given power. Because power corrupts, or rather, it tears down any fake societal and moral norms, leaving only bare ego on display. I stilled my flames, focusing even harder on control, molding fires like clay, and then willing them to spread out like an oil spill. The greenish firewall looked more like fire sea, but it fulfilled its role, stalling for time. Leon wasn't so far gone as to simply charge into a sure death. He instead focused on throwing ice boulders, spears, and needles my way. I ignored him. I had to think. I had to understand. There was something different about me now that I had evolved. I stopped being human, yes, but there was a deeper, more profound change too. I just didn't have time to explore it because of all the shit happening around us. My lips quivered, remembering that a large part of that shit was Gangria's torture treatment. I never ever wanted to be on the receiving end of such experimentation. The cold hands rummaging through my memories were something hard to forget. It was much more fulfilling to deal such cards to the others than to experience them myself. As I calmed down and started to reach within, I noticed in the corner of my eye that the goddess's smile started to reappear. It was a small thing, with the corners of her mouth barely lifting. There was even a drop of what I could only describe as appreciation swirling in her gaze. It took all my willpower not to shudder in response. Being a target of a monster's curiosity was never a good thing, especially if the monster in question possessed two pairs of eyes. Yet despite these setbacks, I still managed to let go of my fears. It took me a minute, but an understanding dawned. A few forces clashed in my mind, each influenced by different parts of my new physiology, or my soul. It was hard to tell sometimes. The dungeon part wanted nothing more than to kill off the undead and then recreate him in my own image. I already had some deathless companions. What was one more? Not to mention the temptation of capturing his essence and repurposing it was immense. Such was Dungeon's greed. The last dredges of humanity that remained, carried by a memory of simpler, happier times, mostly felt revulsion. After all, Charles had been taught all his life that those already dead were the enemy. There was a sliver of pity, the recognition of how duty, more often than not, ended in death or betrayal. Non-situation helped too. Still, the desire to kill remained as the main motivator. And the newest part of my psyche, those with the freshest paint, was the demigod mantle lurking under my mind's surface, wanting to flex its shiny powers, to transform Leon into something more, to give him a new purpose, maybe even turn him into a living being, thus allowing the madness of undeath to fade. It was a drive to show off, to excel, to fulfill the duty for which I was made. I hummed. The choice was clear. I could repurpose, destroy, or transform. And the fact of the matter was that even having this choice was a privilege of the strong. My hesitation was temporary. What was the point of becoming a demigod if I didn't use my mantles? A shit-eating grin slowly formed on my face. I see. I mumbled and noticed Gangria perking up even more. It was concerning, yet I had more important problems on my plate than reacting to a crazy goddess, no matter how loud my subconscious mind shouted. As I warred with hesitation, the flames surrounding me faltered too, and Non used that gap to appear by my side. This forced me to remember that the fires could be manipulated to behave much differently than normal. I just didn't have time to experiment with them. How embarrassing. The former undead was smiling, but I could sense the deep unease hidden underneath her mask, the hesitant question of whether I was still the same man who granted her wish. Was I still the one she swore fealty to? In response to these thoughts, I simply ruffled her hair, and Valkyrie's shoulders relaxed. Don't let Agnes see what you're doing, she teased. She wouldn't condone having concubines on the side. My fiancé knows the difference between affection and love, I shot back. As you say, master. She straightened, the tease vanishing from her eyes. The temptress persona retreated, and only the fanatical soldier remained. What are your orders? Shall I give these winged freaks a trashing, or maybe this vile undead needs to be turned into ashes? Command me. Before I could answer, Leon's anger had risen to its peak. His ineffective attacks only amplified his rage beyond reason. Non's casual disdain probably didn't help either. He screamed, his voice strained. Help me, cowards! Do you think that the newly born demigod will let you leave? There will be no forgiveness, especially after you attacked his lover. Get out of here and fight like men. Or die like trash you are, he added venomously. I chuckled. How fast have I forgotten about the ways of the weak? If an enemy was insurmountable, gather allies until it wasn't. Apes together strong. The levitating castle remained silent for a few moments before its gates opened and a host of winged elves emerged, looking solemn and noble. I nearly spat on the ground. They carried themselves with poise and with the bearing of saviors, although they were nothing more than hateful raiders. An unknown elf was at the front, with the former leader meekly taking place behind him. This new one was distinctly different from the others. He radiated power, but also looked old and fragile, like really old. His skin was sallow under the golden armor, covered in warts and blotches. The eyes, once bright and yellow, now barely opened, hiding the bloodshot orbs full of boredom. It was a strange look for a race that prided itself on its ethereality. And yet this old man was the most powerful being out here, besides myself. Normally we would spit on your cooperation, corpse. The lead elf hewed his words. But the sons of justice must endure many indignations, until the prophesied time comes when the true God resurrects. His gaze turned to my blazing form, bowing slightly. We salute the new demigod, and beg that he let bygones be bygones. I observed him and his troops for a moment before answering. Strangely, there was no anger in my mind, only disgust. You wanted to cleanse my people, kill the love of my life, and now that the situation has changed, you dare to parley as equals? That we do. The old one simply nodded. The children of the Aeon do not bend their backs. We stand proud and tall against all odds. Like hell you do. This time I actually spat on the ground, forcing a flinch from the surrounding angels. You are just a bunch of hypocrites, thinking yourself better than others because of your faith. The green haze on my shoulders intensified. I suddenly understood where the disgust was coming from. A bunch of old relics desperately clinging to the past, using your borrowed power to bully others into submission. And worst of all, you don't understand that there's nothing more permanent than change. I looked him in the eye. Not to mention you didn't even introduce yourself. So much for repentance. I sneered. You toe a dangerous line, O new divinity, the oldie warned. My name is... I don't care, I interrupted. I do not need to know the names of dead people. You. Catch. I threw a frisbee-like plate of fire in their direction, willing it to explode into an animated construct. The missile arrived nearly instantly, and only the old elf's intervention stopped the green flames from decimating his cohort. The flame and light collided, with my attack redirected but not stopped. The air keened as our powers clashed, and the elf grandpa panted before turning his reddish eyes toward me. You will regret this day, false divinity. And now your real colors are coming out, I murmured, ignoring the knife ear and his indignation. Non, do try to kill them, but remember to retreat if the situation seems unfavorable." She nodded, her eyes glinting with a fierce light. "I will make them pay. Agnes is not their toy to play with." "And you?" I turned to Leon. "It seems like I need a more delicate touch." I mused, suddenly reappearing near his left shoulder, the snakes immobilizing him with ease. "It will only hurt a little." My hand pierced through his ribs. "I promise." He screamed as I rummaged inside. I shook my head. So exaggerated. Thankfully, the skeleton's magical core was easy to find, on account of the brightness and mana it exuded. As soon as my fingers closed on his heart, the screams took a different note. Whereas earlier the shouts were carrying mostly anger, now they had been joined by the undercurrent of fear. Still, despite the horror, Leon managed to actually spit a few words. "Coo! Kill me! I would rather die than be disgraced." Hearing these familiar lines, I couldn't stop myself from chuckling. This didn't endear me in the slightest to my captive. I shrugged. It was not important. I refocused on the problem before me and tried to use my innate ability to influence his very being, to change what he would become, as was my birthright. I tensed and promptly hit a wall. I didn't expect Leon's fierce resistance. It was weird. The domain of transformation might be a new power in my arsenal, but using it was mostly intuitive. Controlling it happened just like how I ruled over my flames, with a heavy dose of focus and a pinch of otherworldly imagination. And now the feedback from my new domain suggested that the subject would rather break than allow the change to happen. That was a conundrum. I could always force the last step and then rebuild his soul from the scraps that survived, but it was a distasteful solution, and even worse, it would feel like a loss. To sacrifice such a powerful tool to this kind of compromise reminded me too much of the Lich's failed summoning of Henrik Walzer. All that pomp, all that wasted effort, and what he gained was merely an empty husk. That reminded me. The answer was here all along. Simplest solutions were the cleanest and most beautiful. Like a certain ball driver once said, family. That's the only thing that matters. And I had a perfect candidate to fulfill that role. "Guardian!" I roared, my voice easily traveling through rock and the dungeon's defenses. "Return to the surface! I have a job for you!" I could feel the commotion as my faithful retainer made his way upward, fighting against the grain of the evacuation. Dungeon creatures were still flowing to the lower parts of the underground, despite the apparent cessation of hostilities. Yes, Gangria halted her domain expansion, or whatever the hell her corruption aura was, but I wasn't naive enough to believe in her goodwill. The girth of underground levels and the dungeon stones stacked between her and those I cared about were a feeble barrier, but a barrier nonetheless. They could buy priceless seconds. Leon squirmed, trying to get free, as I wasted time observing a game of tag between Non and the elves, her punches and daggers bleeding them a little with every passing second. At her side stood an eastern dragon, made from the verdant flames that coalesced into a coherent form. It was swerving and weaving, scattering the proud knife ears like flies when it, every so often, breathed out an area attack. My fun had been cut short by an armored figure that appeared in the middle of the dungeon's entrance. A man clad from head to toe in iron, carrying a large sword and walking with the surety of someone knowing their strength. Guardian, one of my first warriors, and more importantly, the only remaining part of the Walzer family. "You want humanity to prosper, right?" I started asking the twitching undead. For a few seconds, Leon just glared in my direction, and just when I lost hope for an answer, he grated out a few words. Somehow, even without skin present, I still felt he was sneering at me. "Nen not leak, you'll understand," he gasped. I loosened my fingers a bit, and his defiant energy returned. "Monsters like you only have one desire, to kill and destroy everything the civilization holds dear." I refrained from pointing out that he was also one of these monsters. "So, to survive, we need strength. Strength at any cost. Strength to dictate our own terms to this cruel world. There is simply no other way. No other way to survive this cursed place and its cruel gods," he added after a second. "Not sure why the gods are suddenly a problem," I murmured before continuing my poorly constructed coercion under his heated gaze. "Don't you have a family? Henrik Walzer was a hero. You were not far behind, or so I heard." I frowned. How it is that neither of you had any children? Not even bastards? I would guess that at a certain point, women were throwing themselves at you. What's with this topic of conversation? Are you asking about my kin to hunt them down? The Lich asked suspiciously, while glancing at Guardian standing nearby. Then he suddenly grinned. Too bad. None of the many people who once shared my blood are alive. Watzer's line has long been extinguished. My enemies made sure of that, he whispered. I sighed dramatically. Ah, hells. I'm bad at segues. I pointed dramatically. You see, not all waltzers are dead. One had actually survived. I dragged him out of hell myself. I present you, Daniel Waltzer, the only surviving son of Henrik Waltzer, and your nephew by blood. There were a few seconds of silence, with both Guardian and Leon staring at me incredulously. From my retainer, I felt a feeling of apprehension, with a healthy dose of fear that soon had been replaced by anger. The undead was harder to read. Do you think I'm stupid? Leon asked tiredly. You can't just grab a humanoid monster and declare it my kin. What do you think you are doing? My family is long dead. I buried them myself. And now you come in and dare to lie straight to my face. He heated up. I will kill you. I'll murder this whole place, and not even sand will remain intact when I'm done with you, demigod or not. Seeing him starting to spiral, I took a deep breath, wondering if the light touch really was worth the trouble. I was never a people person, and it was showing. Yet before I could start berating the crusty old skeleton, another voice joined the conversation. Buried yourself? Guardian words trembled with rage. Buried yourself? Aunt Maria, little Catherine, and her older brother Joan, Father Henrik and my mother Aurelia, with 36 servants, my half-brother Thomas and his little brother Julius, with their mother, concubine Henrietta. What are you, how do you know? Those are people you killed, Uncle. Those are the innocents who were victims of your betrayal. Those are my family whom you most certainly didn't bury. Guardian. No, Daniel Waltzer snarled before lifting the bag of bones in the air. His uncle didn't react to the violence, taking the anger with open eyes while hanging limply in his hands. So don't you dare to mention them so carelessly. Don't you dare to spout nonsense about responsibility and revenge, you trash. Yeah. Do you think I didn't see you try to resurrect Father to further your agenda? You have no leg to stand on, traitor, no honor. You just use and use and use, not sparing a single thought about how the others feel. You were always that way, and even death couldn't change that hateful side of yours. Guardian Daniel threw his uncle to the ground, and the Lich bounced in what would be a comedic fashion, if not for the seriousness of the situation. My servant proceeded to take off his helmet, and to my surprise, it wasn't a completely inhuman visage that greeted us. On some level, I remembered he evolved, with the lack of soul-stabilizing cables and his new mobility proving the depth of the change, but I still didn't expect that from underneath the metal peeked a human, if somewhat pale face. I'm a monster too, Uncle. It was the only way to survive, so forgive me if I don't take your sanctimonious bullshit seriously. Daniel, my boy? Is that really you? The Lich whispered, his hand stretched out, like he was begging for alms. How? How are you? I searched. I swear by the gods, I wanted to find you all. I was buried alive, Uncle. I was left to rot. I screamed for help until my voice grew hoarse, and my fingers broke digging through the stone, desperately hoping for rescue that never came. He glared at his kin with utter contempt, and you, instead of saving what little remained, chose to wallow in self-pity. He sneered before spitting on the ground. We begged for salvation, but our unanswered pleas gave way to madness. To this day, I remember their voices growing quieter and quieter, before being extinguished completely. The young man shook his head before exhaling. I don't know why I bother. You are nothing but a disappointment. He turned back to me. My lord, I know what your intentions are, but I must refuse. There is no bond here. It's our people that need me, not this thing that masquerades as my uncle. They truly need a helping hand, a protector, and I don't intend to disappoint them, just like he disappointed me. Our people, monstrous and not, need a guardian, and I want to fulfill that role with honor. He bowed deeply, sent a last glare at the curled-up skeleton, and departed. The silence bit deeper this time, with the fight between Non, the flame dragon, and the elves seemingly hanging in the balance. We ignored their explosions and shouts as the guardian's steps faded into the distance. I I really I really fucked up, didn't I? The Lich whispered, his blue eyes growing dimmer with each word. I was too caught up in power struggles and grand battles to understand what was most important, too focused on saving the world. His voice hitched. There's no coming back, is there? There may be a way, I said as I edged closer. It wasn't the result I imagined, but hells, if it worked out, then that was fine. Daniel works under Silver Oasis and serves its people. While I can't guarantee anything, if you stay at his side, you may yet repent. At the very least, you will see him often. I tempted. The undead's gaze felt flat. I can see what you're doing, you know. But do you have any other answer than the one I'm giving? I grinned. He kept silent for minutes before exhaling. With decrepit slowness, his head rose, and the blue ice of his gaze met the fiery red of my soul. I suppose not. I don't have to like it. But the answer is clear. Maybe some merciful gods remained on this husk of a world. He glanced at smirking Gangria before adding, just make it quick. Sure, it won't even be painful. I lied without a blink, so just relax. I called upon my mantles, and both chaos and transformation responded with glee, threading faith like it was a warm blanket. The magic and anima descended upon the undead lying before me and infiltrated every part of his body. I knew what would happen next, as the change drew heavily from the before's mythology, adding the non-existent yokai to the present. The battle in the background quietened as both elves and Non observed this fresh miracle. One pair of blood-tinged eyes felt especially prickly, and I suddenly found myself hesitating. There was something suspicious about them. Still, there was work to be done, as my mantles continued with regrowing the flesh, skin, and hair. The change came haltingly, with the whole process looking rather barbaric. The black hair and piercing blue eyes were what emerged first. Then a muscular abdomen with arms and legs, a clean, pristine face filled in later, without a speck of beard or mustache. I turned back to ask Guardian how his uncle looked before, only to notice that Leon now had tits, and there was a distinct lack of balls. Fuck. I made a Yuki Onna, not Yuki Otoko, didn't I? What have you done? Leon's, or should I say Leona, scream of terror sounded nearly cute. What didn't sound cute was the other shout. I understand now. Only by experiencing divinity can one resurrect you, my lord. 104. Charles, a pair of screaming people, one nearby and the other far away, were grating on my nerves. Was it too much to have some peace and quiet after expending much of my freshly gathered mana? Yet, against my hopes, the hoarse cries didn't stop. And while the former sounded bad, like realm-ending bad, I had to first focus on how Leona was adapting to the situation. If I had to find a positive effect of the change, it was that after being monsterized by my own hand, her status no longer remained hidden. I took full advantage of that fact. Privacy? What's that? Can you eat it? That said, the information displayed was a bit bare bones, but it would do for a freshly restored being. Name, Leona, level race, Yuki Onna, Leona, a 42nd level Yuki Onna, or Ice Woman. How fitting. And funnily enough, even the system accepted that he was now a she. I smirked, trying to mask the urge to yell. The situation was bad, but it could be worse. I wasn't going to lie, it was a fuck-up, but a new ability going haywire was kind of par for the course, for me at least. I internally admitted that attempting a highly delicate operation as a complete novice was a bad choice, just like operating on a heart attack victim while still in high school. But it was a forced act, a test to be broken through, and any semi-positive outcome was good enough, since Gangria was breathing down my neck. At least the whole ordeal didn't completely blow up in my face. More importantly, it was not like Leon had any dick to lose, since he remained a skeleton for decades. You know, only a skull and bones. So why all the screaming, all the belly aching? Of course, relaying that opinion to the hysterical former undead could be hard. Impossible, even. Because of that, I chose the next best course of action, to delay. I counted on stages of grief doing their thing and all that jazz. I summoned a comfy blanket and entangled the screaming girl in it, because, of course, her yelling took precedence over searching for something to cover those tits. She seemed to realize the same thing as soon as she was covered and collapsed to the floor in a quivering mess. I would normally feel bad, but instead, there was only relief, as Leona's face changed colors from white to red and back. I didn't know how blessed silence was until it had been so thoroughly trampled. Even as a demigod, ignoring a wailing woman was a hard task. Nonetheless, at this moment, I quietly decided that endorsing silence was going to be one of the tenets of the faith, as long as I had something to say about that. I had only moments of peace before they had been shattered by Leona's sobbing voice. "By the uncaring gods, woman, can you stop?" I yelled. I was the demigod of change, a master of fleshcraft. Even if right now the former undead was a girl, it wasn't like the transformation was permanent. I could always try again and again. Or so I reasoned, even if a quiet voice at the back of my head reminded me how I was also a chosen of chaos. Details, unimportant details. As I was thinking, my gaze wandered close to where Gangria's twins were standing, and then immediately avoided eye contact as both of them raised their eyebrows at me. The goddess incarnations were still observing the situation with their innocent curiosity. That meant my trial was not yet finished. Busying myself, I summoned Non and ordered her to take the newly minted monster downstairs. Leona didn't fight my subordinate. Instead, she hung limply from her arms, looking like her world had ended. She would get better with time, I assumed. The Valkyries' battle with the snubby elves had ended in a draw, both sides retreating after barely any losses. Cut off arms and legs didn't count as damage. Still, Non didn't walk away from the skirmish without some gains. A green shawl was draped over her shoulders, with the shrunk dragon coiling happily around her neck, and yet it recoiled when I tried to pet it. How ungrateful. I shook my head. There were more important problems to be addressed than thankless creations. I wasn't sure what kind of being knife ears were trying to resurrect, but the pressure it radiated was something straight out of a nightmare. To explain, divinities had something a bit like smell, a bit like taste, a new sense that was hard to describe. Still, if I had to make a comparison, then it was similar to synesthesia, an ability to read numbers and letters as colors, only expanded upon. Each of the divine beings I met thus far had something like an aura, a definition of their power stretching outside the material form. A smell. Maybe it was too forward of me to equate Gangria's characteristics with those of demigods, but this second, quickly rising power seemed to confirm my suspicions. Continuing with the smell analogy, even the strongest fragrances after some time tended to fade into the background, allowing the new ones to take their place. And because of that, after I grew used to the earthly rich divinity of the mad goddess, I noticed a new, slowly intruding scent. It was like a condensed light of the sun had been spreading covertly through our surroundings. But that sunlight wasn't benevolent or pure. It had been twisted and corrupted, tainted with death and decay, and the more it shone, the stronger the rot inside spread. The surface of the former silver oasis had already been covered in light, the ruins twisting under another demigod's power. Gangria's twins tilted both of their heads, their eyes following the slow descent of the floating, glowing castle. After a few seconds of listening, smiles bloomed on both of the girls' faces. "How curious! How wondrous!" The left one spoke. "You truly are a child of chaos, aren't you?" The right one added, their blisteringly white teeth reflecting the sudden light. "It can't be said that they resurrected a divinity, but it's close enough to the real thing." The girls turned to stare into my eyes. "You had shown your hand when dealing with a weaker opponent. What will you do when a being stronger than you appears? Will you beg? Will you cry? Will you scream? Will you break?" "We are curious. Show us." They chorused. I gulped, my mouth suddenly feeling parched. Something was coming. I could smell it and taste its malice. These signs and Gangria's joy pointed to a life-threatening catastrophe. "Damn trickster," I whispered, ignoring the fact that this label easily could be attached to me. I took a deep breath before opening my eyes. There was no need to panic. The first order of business was always to know your enemy, but I needed to equalize the playing field before that. My power condensed, and the dungeon trembled under the strain as I devoured the magic power contained within, desperately trying to reinforce my flesh and purge the surroundings. The corroding light stopped progressing and even retreated a bit, but the damage was already done. The surface reminded me of how Hiroshima looked in videos: burnt land, pieces of buildings, plants, and people strewn about. The only thing lacking was deadly radiation, but magic corrosion fulfilled that role with ease. Anything that stepped into this dead zone would die in seconds. I clenched my teeth. "It's not fair," I whispered. "All I ever wanted was to be left alone, to be left in peace." The anger was flowing through my veins like lava. I had some ambition, but who didn't? Nobody cared before I grew in power, gathered allies, and built something for myself. Was it too much to carve a piece of heaven for myself, to shield my friends and family, to simply survive in this cruel world? But the world didn't take it lying down. It fought back. It bled me dry. And each step forward meant 2 steps back. Each wall built, each piece of paradise brought into reality meant an assault by barbarians, heretics, undead, and other scum. If not for the bunkers hidden underground, then the ones following me would already be dead or dying, mutated, trampled, or remade by the forces of my enemies. Weakness truly was a cardinal sin on Yana. I scoffed, feeling my innards change with mana reinforcing my skin and bones. The buzzing grew louder, a bunch of nonsensical words clamoring in my skull. A short laugh escaped my mouth. "Look at me now, Father, rubbing shoulders with gods and demons. I don't know where you are, and I won't say witness me, but the new me will show you how mistaken you were in the past." A laugh, an unserious murmur was my way of dealing with the stress, with the shadows that infested my life. It was Uno's coping mechanism to laugh in the face of death and adversity, and yet, at this very moment I felt compelled to smile, to joke, to march into darkness with a Joker-like grin. This was my resolve. Leaving the useless thinking behind, I focused my newly reforged eyes on the castle, the concentrated power shredding the magic shields and wards that surrounded it. The deeper I went, the brighter the light had become. Along the way, I noticed that there was no living thing in sight. No bodies either. Only the shadows on the walls hinted at the gruesome fate of the remaining knife ears. In a few seconds, my sight pierced through the innermost sanctum of the castle. The central room was completely, insufferably white, with circular, overly decorated pews made from something resembling holly. The similarly colored columns were suspending a grand mosaic on the ceiling, one describing the life and death of a god of justice, presumably the divinity the elves were trying to wake. The whole place was made out of concentric rings, with the central part suspended a few meters above the rest. I noticed a multitude of shadows breaking the white aesthetic, their forms more often than not raising arms in jubilation. A golden urn stood in the middle of this uncomfortable location, radiating power similar to mine, but more condensed, stronger. It was the source of the sour smell I was subjected to for a while: light and death. Near the container, a few remaining elderly elves were crowding, their faces filled with devotion and longing. As I watched, a tendril appeared from within the urn, the thin tentacle curling over the wrinkly elf, and a moment later he dissipated with a sigh of happiness, his kneeling form forever etched on the white walls surrounding the place. I didn't understand the mechanics of what was happening, but details could wait. It wasn't a Power Rangers movie. I wasn't going to wait until the enemy morphed into its final form. The millennia of fighting within Uno's mind gave me many ideas. Technology, ritual sacrifice, steampunk, science fiction, eldritch horror, and the otherworldly magic suddenly made more sense than ever. Both of our lifetimes filled the gaps in understanding, with the only caveat being the lack of time to analyze what truly lay hidden under the veneer of reality. The attack I sent looked crude on the surface, just a piece of rock swirling toward the castle wards, and yet the said rock shattered the elven defenses with contemptuous ease, reconfiguring in flight, turning from an uneven boulder into a rod-like missile. It incorporated the pierced magic and sliced rock into its form, growing sleeker and more dangerous by the second. When it arrived in the innermost chamber, the number of barriers and wards it devoured grew into dozens, and the projectile hummed with hidden power. A fraction of a second later, the explosion shook the elven fortress, and the controlled descent turned into a fall. It didn't matter much, since most of the power was already inside the urn. but I felt that every bit should count. My suspicion was confirmed a while later when a glowing humanoid form exploded into motion and left the falling piece of architecture behind. It looked similar to a man in full plate armor, but without a helmet. Instead, there was a large blindfold covering the upper part of its face, leaving the mouth and curly golden hair free. Something squirmed under said blindfold, constantly moving the material, like its face was covered with tentacles or worse. My expression twisted. "Couldn't you do me a favor and just die?" I asked, while observing my opponent. The freshly made light man floated in the air, seemingly oblivious to its surroundings. My inner sight, however, painted a different picture. The sickly light smell pulsed like a beating heart, expanding and contracting. I summoned the rock missiles again, their self-refinement tempered by my own mana. Different from before, these constructs evolved into humanoid and animal-like forms, with shapes comprised of sharp angles and impossible directions. With each passing second, their power grew. Sadly, my enemy's inaction was coming to an end. The white-clad figure spoke, the words both soothing and grating at the same time. "Why am I here?" It croaked, the tone unquestioningly masculine. Where are my children?" The apparition's despair filled the air, and I had to fight tooth and nail to keep my emotions in check. A mortal would have already tested a barrel of a shotgun. There was a moment of inaction until his head snapped in Gangria's direction. "Why are you here, child?" "To witness your end." The left girl spoke. Old friend." The second one finished. There was gravitas there, something that she lacked when talking with me. The plate-wearing man choked on his words. "I remember." A wail unlike anything I had heard before exploded from his mouth. Then, as soon as it started, the scream faded into silence. He spoke slowly, gravelly, a moment of lucidity amongst the madness that filled his scent. "I was once called Aeon of Light, the first god to uphold justice, be it for mortals or gods." Aeon clenched his fist as I watched something writhe under his skin. But it all changed when the gods of old decided that a child was to bear the brunt of their sins, to be their whip and collar. His gaze turned to Gangria. In their hubris, they wished to control what cannot be leashed, to keep the reins of creation forever. And they did try doing so by binding the soul of their most precious progeny to the greatest creation of craftsman gods. "The system," I whispered, the pieces falling in place. Aeon nodded. "It was a grand undertaking, a ploy to force the living and dead under our dominion, to use what power the young goddess of life and death had, to not grow but to rule. I, of course, refused to follow their intentions," he added proudly. "And for that you had been struck. From the seat of power to ash-buried grave." Gangria's twins finished. The light man's face twisted in sorrow. "Yes, and now it seems like my foolish children sacrificed everything just to bring me back." He gazed forlornly at the desolation below us. And yet, by the cruel twist of fate, it was too little, and at the same time it was too much. With an exhale he kneeled, a curious thing to do when floating in the air. "I will perish, and after eons another should take my place. Gaia, I implore you, if the years we spent together meant anything, then please fulfill my last wish. Save my people. I beg of you." Gangria's old name twisted and turned before my translation skills settled on Gaia. It was a weird, uncanny feeling. The gazes of both girls turned cold. Even for a friend, we are not Gaia, the creator, anymore. We are Gangria, the wound on the world. "Your people will die or be changed, for that is our only way to be free." I watched as hope drained from Aeon, leaving only despair. Whatever corruption he was keeping in check soon ran rampant, the writhing growing in power. I see. So that is the price of failure, to watch those I love turn into dust, abominations, or worse. I suppose I was never good enough to keep the skies from falling. He smiled. It was a lonely thing. "I apologize for what's going to happen. I'll try to save your people, Aeon." The words left my mouth unbidden. This emotion he carried, I simply couldn't let it go. Not when I felt the same about Silver Oasis, about my people. It was a kindred, foolish feeling. I flinched as gazes of both god and goddess converged on me. There was some kind of recognition swirling on Aeon's face. Demigod of transformation, kin of Loki, kin of Pydel. He bowed deeply as I frowned. The translation messed up the first one. And the second person, I knew that name, but when did I hear it? Ignoring my confusion, the writhing god continued, I beg of you, save the ones who follow my creed. They will add to your power as long as you present this token and become my successor. Part of his power simply cracked, the glowing disc suddenly hovering near my eyes. I grasped it tightly, and the aspect of justice enhanced my aura, integrating seamlessly. It was as if that bright mantle was always present in my soul. Seeing that, his smile turned complicated, and I truly hope that you'll survive my change. The last word turned out to be a signal. Aeon screamed, a hoarse, low sound of someone being cut to pieces. For what felt like hours, he wailed and gurgled, the writhing growing more and more intense. Soon the first tentacles emerged, altering his flesh. My creations reacted first, their untamed aggression suddenly finding an acceptable target. The non-Euclidean angels swarmed the tortured god like a swarm of piranha. Their arms, swords, teeth, and fangs cut and sawed, intent on turning flesh into mincemeat. More and more cuts appeared on the light-clad man, and for a second, I thought that it would be enough. Then a howl came, throwing my creations away with ease. Some were shattered completely, others crippled. A few, despite being thrown away, stood their ground, ready to pounce at the slightest sign of weakness. Aeon's body was marred by cuts and holes, but he didn't seem any weaker. The only difference from before was the lack of a blindfold. But now I understood why he wore one. His face was filled with writhing, swarming eyes, constantly moving and blinking. They gazed blindly at anything that approached, filled with soundless malice. Then he smiled with a different expression than before. Gone was the calm and composed divinity. Only a hungry animal remained. His desire to kill, to devour, came like a wave, dissolving my creatures as if they weren't even there. I grimaced, calling upon my powers, summoning imaginary shields and cliffs, trying to keep the sea of hunger away. And yet it wasn't enough. The power of his aura was eating through my defenses, not quickly, but just like a real sea would, a droplet at the time. It was a losing battle. The 1,000 swirling eyes focused on my figure, only some of them glancing at the nearby gangria with half-hidden greed. Both Aeon and I strained, focused on keeping our mana intact, shoving and cursing, like we were a pair of sumo players, not divinities. The situation turned into a bit of a stalemate, but in reality, I was slowly losing ground. It did, however, leave me with enough agency to look around. It was at that time that I noticed Gangria's relaxed posture. As soon as she noticed my attention, her countenance shifted, and I observed in shock as a goddess of life and death. Gangria, the wound of the world, mouthed a few words, as if she were but an unruly teenager. Remember what the Aeon said. I startled. Was there some grand idea, a hidden power I didn't uncover? As I mused, his last words came unbidden. I truly hope you'll survive my change. Then something clicked. I was going at it wrong, waving my authority like it was a stick to beat people with. There was a need for finesse, for understanding, because what was my power if not an idea given form? I focused on change as an evolutionary aspect, a way to grow in power, grant it to my servants, and modify them according to my wishes. But that wasn't all that change was. It was a part of death as we grew old, weakening us with each step. It was the cancer that devoured our bodies. It was a madness that lay hidden in our minds. It was darkness that broke men and their bonds. And it was mine to wield. I turned, the glint in my eyes turning predatory. There wasn't much left out of Aeon. His body had grown, the strands of muscles and bone transforming him into a powerful, armored monstrosity. It looked like a hunger manifest, and at the same time like a man skinned alive with glistening muscles, 100 eyes, and a maw full of fangs. And herein lay my chance. I focused on the things that made him tick, at the change that was the foundation of it all. And when my intent was attached to the stolen power, I simply pulled. We are flesh and blood of the sinners. We are hunger incarnate. The corruption sang, and the hunger thrummed. We are the hunt that never stops, the last gulp of food, the first taste of forbidden. You are flesh and blood, and hunger and 1,000 hopes. My own song hummed back before changing, but the time for war was already past, and now the muscles break, blood thins, bones crumble to dust. The endless reaper comes for us all, and it's your time to sleep, to stop carrying this grail, to rest. The singing grew louder with each passing minute, but the battle of ideas was already over. Aeon's new body fell to the ground, the corded muscles and glistening tendons withering at an unnatural pace. Soon the monster that devoured a god turned feeble and old, with an aura of desolation surrounding the crater where it landed. I moved nearby, hoping that something was left out of the Aeon's former self, maybe gain some last words of wisdom. Instead, I observed as he turned in my direction, whispering one last word. Hungry. Then his flesh flaked into dust. Minutes later, there was nothing left of the man who once claimed he was an incarnation of justice. His gift now vibrated in my soul, a strange partner to my domains of chaos and transformation. A moment later, a girlish sigh interrupted my melancholy. Always too good. For this rotten world, she whispered before turning her gaze on me. No. The left one stretched her words. What will you do? The right one added, will you try to change me? Her pearly laugh sounded like funeral bells to my ears. 105. Charles. The silence hung between us like a stretched wire. Gangria's eyes were both predatory and full of hope. It was a strange mix, with a whole mess of boredom and a pinch of anticipation fitted like a piece of PVC into a stainless steel pipe. Weird. Different. Barely fulfilling its purpose. Just like two seemingly innocent girls given the power of a god. There was also a scrap of fear, a spoon of some other unidentified emotion. The whole shebang. I grinned, mentally kicking myself for the runaway thoughts. The stress was already getting to me if I had time to feel empathy, but before I could say something stupid, Gangria herself cut the silence short. We understand the difficulty and hope for nothing. But the oldest of our friends made this sacrifice. So it's only proper to let you do your best. So relax. We won't be resisting. I knew what she was doing. My new mantle throbbed and shook at her words. It pulsed behind my eyes. There was a need for action, for change, for the world to be turned right. I did wonder why Aeon shared his power over justice, but not light. Now it seemed like the answer was terrifyingly simple. It was all about the consequences. Ruling over light was easy. White walls, bright halls, and a lack of darkness were all that was needed. No other chains, no additional caveats. Justice? Justice was different. The word, the purpose behind the meaning, carried a certain weight and expectation. It forced compliance, thoroughness, clarity of purpose. The concept in its simplicity was just a collar, a cross to be carried over the centuries. I assumed that because of this surety, Aeon was so trusted. He lived cleanly and died because of that, trying to do what he felt was right, a constant, an enforcer, a slave. But both of the old gods made a mistake here. Both Aeon and Gangria couldn't imagine that, just as my own concept, transformation, wasn't so easily defined, the same applied to justice. Add some chaos to the mix, and the earlier surety turned not so unchangeable. It was just a question of perspective. These relics weren't aware of the multitude of stories about good turning evil, about both of them becoming meaningless, about heroes shifting into ultimate betrayers because of the overwhelming certainty, about the cursed worlds where absolute order triumphed and the greater good was the most monstrous concept of them all. They haven't encountered Asimov's zeroth law, the idea of how the single evil actions can lead to good consequences. And once that constant was established, the sky was the limit. And because of that, this chain and collar they put on me, it was nothing, a trifle. After all, I had something precious, something that I needed to protect, and doing so was my justice. Not to mention, it fed into the saving of the world from the mad goddess. What was that if not justice? The concept screamed, trembled, and thrashed as it was transformed, and when it surrendered and changed, it refused to be chained anymore. It yearned for action, for chaos to be sown, and at the same time, for my people to be safe. For Agnes, Master Vincent, Old Man Adam, and every other soul trembling underground, praying to survive this calamity. I wouldn't let them down. They were mine. It was easier than I felt it should. Was that because of stubborn dungeon core remnants singing in my soul? Or were the stories that eschewed good and evil the real reason? I didn't know. But the need to act was slowly getting stronger. The twin goddess ignored my plight, even as she observed the condensing faith. Her avatars were staring me down with the look of a bored parent stuck watching her progeny's first performance, and yet there was no impatience in her eyes, just ancient disappointment. And yet behind that indifference I sensed an ill intent. It wasn't directed at me, no. It was subtle. And yet, now I knew. I understood. Her seemingly indifferent gaze every so often searched the underground with malice twirling inside as soon as she noticed something or somebody there. Before taking on the mantle, it would be hardly visible, but the justice thrashing inside my chest had easily recognized the danger. There were still many pure humans hidden underground, crying, praying, and trembling. They were Gangria's enemies, and somehow I doubted that she would stop at anything short of total destruction to eliminate them, ignoring all collateral damage to the rest of my people. Why? Because of what she said about it herself. That as long as a single member of prime races drew breath, she would be forever chained to serve as their system. Humans, elves, dwarves, and even the half-elves were all her enemies. Well, maybe not exactly enemies. It was something less, more impersonal. Targets to purge, bugs to exterminate. One didn't wage war on ants. Are you ready to try and fail? She asked, a trace of humor in her eyes. I ignored the earlier malice, focused on the present, and nodded. Despite how the poisoned mantle she granted me was barely shaping my thoughts, there simply wasn't any other choice but to comply with her request. The power difference between us was stark. I was a child standing before an armed and armored soldier, or worse, a tank, hells, maybe even a destroyer, and armed with a metaphorical fork, I had to defeat them. I had to try. Otherwise, all would be lost. If not entertained, Gangria would surely immediately rush to exterminate those poor souls hiding underground. So, clenching my teeth, I summoned the freshly gained power, the one that was given freely, and the one that was taken. I might be a child, unsure of my power, and yet my personal justice demanded that the challenge be attempted. The faith came like a cold wave, settling over my shoulders and into a nearly physical form, a cloth woven from the human survivors' prayers, asking anyone and anything to lend them strength to survive this calamity, for a demigod to be their salvation, to shield them from harm. A few punches of clear trust added to that, their source clear when Agnes, Non, Adam, and every changed soldier joined the river, unconsciously understanding the importance of this moment. Then came the rats and even some of the snakes, their pure and simple belief in me adding a familiar green haze to the manifestation. A few of the undead followed, and with surprise I noticed their burgeoning intelligence. The cape swelled as a trickle of power added to the volume, coming from far north. It was strange, primal, tinged with fear and awe. I shook my head. Beggars can't be choosers. And as I decided on that, the mantle settled, becoming more cape-like, made from greenish silk with a barbaric fur-like flare. The material was pure, otherworldly, and its touch on my skin reinforced the convictions that were already a part of me. Even if I had to bleed myself dry, I was going to succeed. Gangria's twins squinted. It is both a familiar form and a completely different one. They murmured one after another, but their curiosity waned as soon as it appeared. It was clearly too much to expect something more. But don't worry, you will have time to ponder and polish your powers. Hearing those words, I understood she thought me too weak to make a difference, and yet no anger stilled in my head. I wasn't a chosen of wrath, after all. And yet, despite the odds, I still want to try, I answered, my eyes clear with purpose.
That is,
You're right. The twins nodded, spreading their hands as if in a welcoming hug. Their expression was solemn, like someone seeing their dead friend's child. I sensed the barrier around the divine flesh weakening as Gangria fulfilled her promise, trying her best to accept my attacks. Our surroundings immediately reacted, boiling, mutating, and turning anything alive or undead into a screaming mess as the goddess of life and death let loose. She was a soldier, sheathing her weapon, and yet she still wore a bulletproof vest. I spat on the ground. There wasn't going to be a better chance, so, future be damned, I decided to take it. The mantle, or should I say cape, reacted to my decisiveness and swirled around me like a living tornado. It transformed, shifting and curling around my form. There was only a moment until I lost control, and it would burst forth. Before that happened, I knew I had to shape the attack. Imagination was paramount. I already understood that during the battle against Uno, against Charles. Even if we fought in the mental realms, completely different from current reality, some truth still carried over. So, according to that past knowledge, I decided to lean on that power. I chuckled at the first thing that came to mind. It was easy to predict. What was the most powerful weapon? Nuclear bomb. In Uno's past, people had been trained on that idea. The ultimate destruction equated radiation, twisted genes, and nuclear winter. It equated MAD, the destruction that would cook and cool the globe. There was just one problem. This wasn't the imaginary space, and I had no idea how to make radioactive materials go boom. Well, not enough to do anything anyway. A few thoughts about atoms going bonk did echo in my head, and yet it was not enough to work. I needed something different, something easier to implement. Thankfully, humans were full of spite, and our arsenal was essentially unlimited. A little thing came to mind, an idea of destruction from up high, amassed not by splitting atoms, but sheer fucking force, a piercing projectile falling from up above, teasingly called a rod from God, or in simple words, orbital kinetic bombardment. It was a truly fitting name for an attack that was meant to shatter the defenses of a true divinity. The seconds passed, and the idea condensed, turning into reality. The choice had been made. It was time. The power drained from me like liquid from a broken water skin. And yet, even after that sacrifice, I didn't relent. I poured more and more, this time shattering parts of the dungeon, even as I felt the invisible bonds of magic snap, then crumble when stretched over limits, and with it parts of my soul. My desperation didn't go unanswered, even if I tried to keep the pain hidden. The rats, one of my oldest children and the ones closest to my divinity, understood the need, and a wave of sacrifices reinforced the warm river of power. Their lifeblood raised me even higher, and the mantle turned reddish-green as if in response. And then I let loose, materializing. For a moment there was only silence and a raised brow of a goddess. Then the screaming of air started as the tungsten rods began to heat up in the atmosphere. Giant pieces of metal were hurling toward their target, and as the noise grew louder and louder, Gangria turned the heads of both her avatars to the sky. The girls watched with curiosity as a red, nearly melted metal made its presence known. The rest was so quick that it all happened in the blink of an eye. There was a noise as if heaven had crashed onto earth and then turned into shards of glass. Then the destruction happened, as I stood, stunned, thankfully immune to the Armageddon I had unleashed. It was not a nuclear explosion, but it reminded me of one. The earth and mutating life were scorched in all-devouring fire right before my eyes. A second later, the first shockwave sped through the earth, uprooting tree stumps, rocks, and whatever else had somehow survived the attack. Then the second and third followed, as more rods impacted the ground. And then the rest of the rods arrived. The destruction shook the earth again and again. The surface of my dungeon turned to glass, with a dust cloud covering everything and everyone. And yet, despite the power shown, I despaired. I knew it was not enough. I wanted to burn through even more reserves, summon more tungsten rods, but my power failed me, leaving only the path of no retreat. Blood colored my teeth as I smiled, prepared to burn it all. Maybe being conservative was a mistake. Hesitation was a mistake. Minor soul damage was what scared me earlier. I was not afraid now. But when I was staggering on the brink of ultimate sacrifice, something happened. Something I didn't expect. A miracle had arrived. Thousands of voices screamed aloud, their jubilations clear, and with their shouts came power. Praise the risen Aeon. The returned master is here. Aeon Vicious heard our pleas. Praise the immortal incarnation of justice. Praise. Praise. The belief, the joy, and vindication could be heard from the thousands of elven voices. Why were they screaming? Because elven theocracy, the worshippers of Aeon of old, understood that their master had been reborn, and they celebrated that knowledge with all that they had. As a whole nation rejoiced, another river of power entered my flesh, and I swelled with power. Yet that was not without a price. My ears lengthened, with my face growing even more handsome, but turning somewhat innocent and childish. I didn't care. Flesh was temporary, tungsten rods were eternal. With the sudden infusion, I summoned more gifts, and returned Gangria's focus to the grand finale. But now I knew it wasn't enough. So I dug deeper, deeper into the most monstrous, heinous parts of Uno's fabricated future of warfare, of times when whole words died in battle, souls squashed by billions, and found out that truly, human ingenuity had no limits. I found genetic plagues, the illnesses so dire and insidious that they devoured their creators. But they were not the end, because where science didn't work, magic might prevail. And when brute force was insufficient, I would easily turn to guile. I sent another attack, hissing missiles made of acid with a biological agent contained within, a cancer designed to cripple gods. I was both awed and horrified as it materialized. The lack of understanding of biology was bridged by copious amounts of mana, so copious that Gangria immediately noticed that something was going on, her smile full of fascination and praise, the emotions visible even through the unleashed hell. It was working, but even that was a deception. The real attack, the real change I was applying to her mind and soul, appeared as if it were a piece of dust, a particle slowly drifting through the air. It moved slowly, naturally, drifting through the cracked barrier of the goddess. I dared not look, yet, despite my attacks, despite my hopes, Gangria, the goddess of life and death, noticed something unusual, even though the virus was perfectly camouflaged, and then she crushed it in her hand. I lowered my head. The minutes passed as Gangria wrestled with the plague, turning the magic and science inside out, evolving her flesh and soul in a bid to stop what I had unleashed. She struggled a bit, the explosions forgotten, with our surroundings already returning to their mutated state. But these were the last bursts of power from my creations before being squashed by the level difference. I was completely drained, barely keeping upright on my knees while trying to gasp for breath. Interesting concept, demigod, she muttered as her flesh stopped churning. Just a bit too volatile. Gangria's gaze was intense, interested. I nodded, feeling how parts of my soul grew cold and still. The damage was severe. The twin goddess didn't care about my plight. I didn't either, but the silent pressure was forcing me to speak. It's something that will inevitably turn on its creator, I explained. A true end-all weapon. I was gambling on its sheer adaptability. I added the last bitter words. Very impressive. That was the first real praise I heard from her lips. Alas, a child cannot win against a soldier, even if it can make her sweat. Gangria's gaze turned downward, transcending the safety of stone and magic I surrounded my people with. Your followers need to die, she whispered, as I felt the same malice she exuded earlier. But something was different. She changed. I would normally call them as, no human man or woman can survive. It's my freedom. Or theirs. She reasoned aloud. There was hesitation in her voice. I bowed and pressed my advantage, explaining why such action was unnecessary. I have my own ways to do so. The potions will turn the remaining ones, ensuring your freedom, my lady. I begged while kneeling. The breath was hitching in my lungs. Right now, I felt less like a demigod and more like an overweight mortal, one with a fucking asthma. They remain a viable faith source, and the genocide won't be needed. We could start the grand undertaking of rebuilding Yana that much sooner, and with more mortal hands. She hesitated once again before nodding slowly. Despite your failure, you may do so. I thank the lady, I murmured while celebrating inside. It worked. It had worked. My last frantic gamble paid off. From the depths of magic and biology, I created something that, to this day, exists only in fiction: a mimetic virus, a piece of thought given form, an agent of change and destruction that was untraceable and unable to be defended from. Even then, I wasn't sure if it could work its wonders if not for the distractions. I might have lost the fight, but the poison was already in her system by the end of our battle. I would take this win, or not loss. Until the last moment, I wasn't sure if the virus would do the job. Her barrier was compromised, my power drained, and yet I managed to do what I wanted. I saved my friends, my followers. As I celebrated, my power slowly returned. But something was wrong. I felt weak, damaged. Twin Goddess looked at me with pity. You have overdrawn your strength, and thus you'll face consequences. The left Gangria shook her head. I cannot fathom why aeons of justice do so. She lied, even as the second twin added. They're always so fragile, yet true to their word. I wanted to laugh and to scream. What was this lambasting? Was she checking if the mantle had truly changed my thinking? But as soon as I grumbled, her whole demeanor changed. Suddenly, there was the gravitas of a god keeping me on the ground. So, will you be a part of my pantheon? Will you serve me as my enforcer? Will you keep me on the path of justice? Will you follow my commands in turning this place around? The girls asked in succession, their words pouring out so fast that they blended together, and in the end they asked a last question. Will you kneel before me? Their eyes were sad and lacking the earlier intensity. Right now, at this vulnerable moment, Gangria looked like a lost girl searching for a guardian, not a millennia-old deity. And yet the spoken words hung heavily in the air. I understood. Beyond this whole theater and tear-jerking emotion, it was first and foremost a test. Were I to answer wrong, me and mine would be annihilated. I had no doubt. Kneeling before her, it was easy, as was pledging my allegiance. I would flop on my back, showing my belly, and bark like a dog if it allowed my people to survive. Still, grand proclamations had to be said clearly. There was no room for error. So I straightened up, while still on my knees. Hereby I proclaim, as Aeon Vicious, justice reborn, that I will follow Gangria and her kin in the conquest of this planet. We will purge and change all who shackle the system and turn the future of Yana around. I pledge this submission on my authority as a demigod of transformation, chaos, and justice. May the heavens strike me down if I lied. I added after a second of thought. My heart shuddered at the last part, but instead of a bolt of thunder, it was a system window that had greeted me. You had become a part of Gangria's new pantheon. And that was it. No other proclamations. No soul-severing change. Just a tired smile from the twins. We look forward to working with you. I smiled back, despite the aching back. There was so much more work to do, but at least my people would be safe. And besides, I promised to help Gangria with the conquest. What would come after, not even the gods knew. Epilogue 1, Returnees. John come up. The journey aboard the triumphant return was boring. That was an understatement of the century. John sighed. He couldn't understand how his parents made a trip to the new lands while enduring such discomfort. The ships were large and creaky, with far too many new Drossians aboard. Even as acting captain of the expedition, he didn't have much space to himself. At least his co-captains aboard Righteous Bearing and True Air weren't in much better situation, he thought with a trace of glee. John hated both the fat Ulios and the shifty Rain, who were both cooperators and at the same time rivals when it came to repossessing the old world's riches, or stealing them, because no matter how much he tried to frame it righteously, he knew, along with everybody else, that their goal was scavenging the dead, grave robbing if one were more down to earth. But at the same time, there was no way around it. They were all forced by circumstance. The New Republic fared less than stellar, much differently than they had first expected when embarking on freshly colonized soil. The promised continent turned out to be a chain of slightly larger islands, blessed with abundant food sources, but sorely lacking in iron, coal, and easily quarried stone. Even wood suitable for the construction of traditional ships and houses was rare out here. That meant there was no easy way to replenish their clothes, paper, or materials, no way to build an industry, no neighbors to trade with, no avenue to gather scholars and research new ways of life. Drossians took a great deal of supplies on their journey, but these caches were finite. If things were left to continue as they were in a few scant generations, the reborn Dross Republic would degenerate into a bunch of illiterate tribes. They would survive as these new lands were flush with fish and fruit, but something irreplaceable would be lost. John was a second generation native, one who was born and became an adult on the Isles, never seeing their fabled homeland, and yet even he noticed the differences between his parents' generation and his peers. It was clear that the situation couldn't continue, and so, with a great deal of deliberation, a course of action has been decided. A twofold choice was made. Using simple boats carved from wood and the freshly acquired know-how, the citizens of the new Dross Republic would continue to scout the nearby waters, hoping to discover mineral deposits, new islands, or hopefully a bigger landmass, more suitable for colonization. At the same time, an effort was made to repair some of the ships that had carried their people's great exodus. While there were hundreds of them in the beginning, many were turned into resources over the years. The wood, iron nails, and even cloth sails were irreparable now. Of all those vessels, only 3 could be repurposed within a manageable timetable: Ulios's righteous bearing, Rhine's true heir, and John's triumphant return. Even after their departure, the work salvaging the ships would continue, and in a few more years, another expedition would be ready to set sail. Even if the current chance was somehow fated to fail, Dross Republic would survive. And that was the bitter truth behind the reason why a bunch of third sons was leading such an important mission. They were expendable, and at the same time experienced enough to give the Republic's plan at least some chance of success. Their mission was simple: return to the old world their predecessors had fled, salvage as much material as possible, and then flee with haste. According to their betters, Yana was surely overrun by either undead or monsters, so their actions had to be quick and shameless. Even if they returned with cargo holds full of nails, ore, and wood, they would be welcomed back as heroes. The expedition followed a trail of blood and tears. Their maps were antiquated things, made viable by the sacrifices of their ancestors. At the foundation of the plan lay old, crumbling mentions that their predecessors expanded upon, sending vessel after vessel into the ocean's embrace, all to chase a dream. Yana's oceans were 100 times more dangerous than the most infested monster dens on the land. And yet amongst that sea of danger, a small lifeline had been found, a path between monster lords' dominions allowing for safe passage. It was knowledge they had paid in blood, and even with their grand exodus being so well planned, the Dross Republic paid a heavy price to drag at least part of their citizens to the new shores. Along the way, they lost countless riches, knowledge, history, and dear friends. At least that was how John's father had explained it. And so here he was, a third son of a merchant family, striving once again to triangulate the path, not because he feared making a mistake, but because he was so bored. There was nothing to do other than fish, drink, and read. Fishing was never John's forte. The drinks had been locked under key since a few first-near riots, when muscular sailors started breaking heads of Marine contingent after being confined to a ship's claustrophobic halls for a week. And he finished all books stowed on board even faster than the seamen gulped down their drinks. Because of that, John was bored to death and decided to kill time reading and rereading old world accounts. They were fragmentary, curious things, the pieces describing other nations, the non-humans, the deep halls of dwarves and sacred elven forests whose denizens all fought for the world shoulder to shoulder with their ancestors, the powerful monsters and unfathomable cold undead, the gods who had abandoned them, and the almighty system, which, even though as if muted, still worked even far away from Yana. It was all so fascinating, and here he was, aboard the expedition to uncover these truths. Well, not really, but as a leader he surely could find some remains, maybe even living specimens. John trembled with delight. Already far into the delusion, they were still a few days from shore, safe from any possible encounters, but nobody could forbid him from dreaming a little. Elves, dwarves, even undead would be fine. It was at that moment that the doors to his cabin nearly exploded from the person barreling inside. "Captain! Captain!" The newcomer hollered, his tanned and muscular body clearly showing a man who didn't avoid physical work, much unlike John's pale skin. "Captain, we have a problem." "Gods above, at least knock, man." The young man spun around, stowing his rapier back into the sheath. "I thought we were under attack, First Mate Alberson." "Oh!" The muscle-bound brute stared blankly for a moment before continuing in an unsure tone. "But we might be, sire." "What hogwash are you spouting?" "You see, there's a smoke on the horizon. The men are all weirded out about it." "Smoke? Smoke? Out here? We're 100 kilometers from the shore," John bellowed. "How can there be smoke?" "That's what the men are asking, sire." John hummed, murmuring under his nose. How curious. What could it be? An illusion? Maybe an underwater volcano? Or a monster marking its territory? "Captain?" "Yes." John's face twisted in displeasure. "Out with it!" "Shouldn't we Shouldn't we ask other captains?" John froze. "Right. Not a bad idea. Let's go. Prepare the mirrors." "Aye." Communication mirrors were another piece of salvaged ancient technology. They reflected sun rays, which a trained sailor could then interpret and translate into more digestible language. The mirrors were hazy, unwieldy, and hard to repurpose or recycle. Because of that, a lot of them survived the first wave of salvagers that plagued the ships in search of wood, iron, and everything else not attached to the floor. A few minutes later, both John and Alberson stood on deck waiting for the council of their twin vessels. Around them gathered a small circle of curious marines and sailors, waiting for the interpreter to start his shouting. John wanted to disperse them, but stopped under the first mate's askance. "Bad for morale," he said, and the young captain hesitatingly agreed. It didn't matter. The ship was a closed system after all. Only minutes passed when the first flashes of light arrived back from the other ships, and the barking started. Air, turn, back, danger, mission, priority, change, shore, avoid. That's rain for you. Always cautious. John sighed. The lithe and ratty co-leader never wanted to take risks and greatly feared for his safety. It was infuriating, but at the same time, he rarely took serious losses because of that. "Oh, it seems like Ulios isn't that far behind. Righteous, full speed, curious, profit follow. And here's Ulios' fat bulk, always greedy for more. More food, more gold, more power. Reckless. But what does that make me?" The young man's eyes grew cloudy. "Captain?" his first mate asked quietly. John's expression stabilized. He took a deep breath and bellowed orders. "Prepare for battle. All men to their stations. Issue weapons and armor. Reload crossbows. We are entering a possible battle zone." He turned to Alberson. "We follow after righteous bearing. Prepare for an ambush." John's face hardened. "If needed, they will be bait. The expedition must succeed whether we return or not. Or they." The next few minutes were full of chaos. Marines shouted and ran aboard, frantically preparing their weapons, taking stock of bolts, and trying to find their place in the formation. At the same time, sailors were desperately turning the ship while avoiding the scrambling soldiers, and yet there was no trace of earlier hostility to be seen. All grudges between crewmates had been forgotten in the face of a new potential danger. The rest of the journey was quiet, even as they observed true air turning tail and moving away from the smoke. And then, minutes later, they saw it, an abomination of steel and green crystal. "By all the fated gods, how does that thing float?" John's first mate asked, but the man himself was too fascinated and busy devouring the weird floating thing with his eyes to answer. It was dissimilar to any ship John had seen before, nor one he had read about in his books. A nearly flat piece of metal was floating on water, with the ship's deck and sides made out of various larger and smaller iron sheets smushed together by some unknowable force. It had no sails, but instead a large pole protruded in the middle of the weird ship, spewing out a frankly ridiculous amount of smoke. On its both sides were monstrously large wheels made either out of iron or really dark wood. This abomination of a vessel was practically bristling with ominous green crystal and strange spear-like machines, and the decks were swarming. John blinked. "Alberson, give me the long eye." "Aye." It was another of the old world wonders, although much rarer than the mirrors. A perfectly polished crystal clad in a bronze tube made things appear as if they were closer than in reality. Was that long forgotten magic? Scientific discovery of his ancestors? John didn't know, nor did he care. At this moment, all he wanted to do was to see. A second later, he wished he hadn't. By the gods, he whispered, there are monsters aboard. So many of them. They have noticed us. Then his breath hitched. What is that? No, 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 he continued, looking. They're turning our way! Evasive maneuvers! Evasion, I said. Turn right. No! As he screamed, the sailors scrambled to follow orders, not understanding the reason, and yet trained to obey. The ship pivoted as the wood screamed under their feet, protesting the rough treatment. But despite these groanings, Triumphant Return didn't break. It swerved nearly 90 degrees, and as it finished the turn, the sea quadrant they had left churned with destruction. John felt cold sweat dropping down his back. Captain! What? John snapped, still observing the nervous activity on the enemy ship's deck. The bearing. What about it? It's sinking, sire. It has been only minutes. His long eye immediately changed target, and there it was, a pride of their expeditionary fleet full of holes and broken sails, reduced to broken timber. A few flailing forms desperately clung to the debris. May the forgotten gods have mercy on their souls. He started praying unconsciously. His father always said that even if the gods were absent, their shadows were still more powerful than mortals like them. Captain! Yes. Look, Alberson pointed at the horizon. There, and there, and there, and there. He turned back to John. We are fucked, right, Captain? There was an expression of despair etched on his face as they both gazed at the sight of black pillars appearing all around them. More smoke on the horizon, Captain! The lookout uselessly reported. I know. John returned to his long eye, hoping for something. What he saw both filled him with fear, because there were things worse than death. His father taught him about that sincerely, and yet the actions of their enemies proved that they were no simple monsters. They're preparing to board! Brace for impact! All hands on deck! The young captain bellowed orders again. And may the gods have mercy on our souls too, he added quietly. He took place in the defensive line as the iron monster of a ship slowly, cautiously drifted closer to their vessel. A few sailors climbed the ropes, intent on peppering incoming troops with bolts, only to get shot down immediately, either by magic or some strange ironwood staves. The attacking vessel was much closer to the water table than their own ship, so despite dire circumstances, John was curious about how they wanted to proceed with an attack. Soon his question was answered as strange metal tubes were brought to the front of enemy lines, lined up, and fired. With a sharp sound, they soared through the air before unfurling into a rope lined with teeth, which quickly sank into the Return's deck. Thunk, thunk, thunk. One after another, the points of ingress were made, and the crowd of monsters started climbing, clearly used to the item's purpose. But before he could order the sailors and marines to plug the gap, something else had happened. With a terrible roar, the few of a large rat abominations beat their chests before springing up and barely reaching their ship, their claws sinking as deeply into the wood as the assault weapon did, not counting one, which slipped and fell into the water with a startled yelp, at which sight most of the enemy monsters stopped and started laughing. Worse, they traded jokes in human language. Look at the big guy. I told him to train more, but no, he needs to eat. He always needs to eat. Why join the armada if he's so clumsy? Well, imagine falling like that with the ground underneath. Oof. Wise words. Stop chattering, speaking, a rat man in a large hat screamed furiously. We have a vessel to assault. Charge attack. A young, sharp-eared woman emerged from the crowd. You heard the man. Her face could be called beautiful if not for the scales. She smacked a few of her fellow monsters around. Form ranks, advance, and by the gods make Aeon proud. Praised be his name. The chorus answered, and the attack resumed. And remember, we need them alive. A way to their sanctuary must be uncovered. As John wondered if he had just experienced what a siren looked like, his gaze had been filled with a large, muscular rat. The thing carried a gigantic club, which it used to smack people around. Those hit had either their limbs broken or were thrown out of the ship into the surrounding waters. This was pretty much a death sentence. Hey, how the fuck is that taking alive, huh? John screamed indignantly at the monster, and to his surprise, the question stopped it in its tracks. The thing's face crumpled in thought before its small eyes blinked. Me sorry. It thought some more. Me no. Me can't do nothing but smack. Then, with a disarming honesty, it continued. Me stupid. As John stood there, his weapon lowered, his surrounding troops piled on the monster, driving it back with axes, swords, and spears. The shouts of pain of the rat abomination returned the young captain to reality. He glanced around, observing his people being cut down, even as the enemy tried to keep as many of them alive as it was possible. Their enemies were losing troops quickly, but they completely ignored casualties, their zeal carrying more and more rats and beastkin forward. The only ones winning consistently were a few lithe forms swaying between them. The sharp ears were a class of their own. Sirens, John thought with a bitter smile. It was too bad he met them this way. And yet the reality was cruel. There were no hidden masters on the deck, no cards to play. If the battle continued, they would soon lose. Seeing that, he breathed in before screaming, "Stop!" The battlefield froze under the force of his raw anger. John knew that the confusion was temporary and pounced on the chance to make a difference. You, he pointed at the Ratman. What's your name? The monster straightened up. This one name calling is Admiral 7, the chief leader of Rattling Armada Number 7. It declared without shame. John's eyes widened, but he wasn't going to laugh out loud at the introduction, no matter how ridiculous it sounded. My name is John Kamop, he responded in kind. I'm a captain of this vessel. Now tell me, Admiral, if we surrender, will we keep our lives? Come up. Where? The rat in command muttered before shaking its head. Doesn't matter. The maps they have will allow us to fulfill the mission. Yes, as a leader-chief of the 7th Rattling Armada, I swear promise. All of your men will keep your lives. After initiation, you will be allowed to join Ad to our glorious purpose. So I swear to uphold this oath. On the Aeon. The faces of surrounding monsters grew serious. Many made a strange symbol with their fingers or claws. May the gods have mercy on us, then. I accept. Men, drop your weapons. That's an order. As the humans under John's command reluctantly accepted the surrender, the Rat Admiral smiled, showing his sharp teeth. Don't worry, soon you will swear only on the true gods. John's face fell. Now, who wants to gamble on how many lizard men we get from the new formula? As the monsters cheered, John's eye started to twitch. The decision to stop fighting suddenly felt like a mistake. Are we fucked? It was only as he woke up the next morning, shaking his new feathers loose, that he understood how fucked they were. Still, Seagullkin wasn't the worst transformation. At least I wasn't turned into a fish like that other guy. He shuddered. With his capture, the invasion was in full swing. Epilogue 2. Retribution. The heavenly realms. She stalked the halls like they were hers, and in the manner of speaking, they were. A long-lost daughter of an old master had returned to claim what was taken unjustly, the wrath of eons coalescing in her eyes and adult form. She preened at the thought. She was no longer forced to endure the duality of her avatars. There were no more childish eyes and bodies and words. No, she, Gangria, stood as a complete being, as an avatar of revenge and retribution for the sins of her father and all his cronies. The old name of Gaia has been abandoned as a tainted thing given to her by that traitor, the monster who enslaved her, his own flesh and blood, the one who preached about sacrifice and then turned around and fled. Hypocrite. Shut it. A lazy voice echoed in her head. You can act as you like, showing the world how healed you are, but we all know that's but a lie. You are a broken, pitiful thing, nothing more. Silence. The phantom in her mind quietened, not because it was scared of her, but because it had spoken its piece. This cold indifference angered her even more than their earlier forced coexistence. Focus, the phantom reminded. You have a purpose here, no matter how distasteful. But tell me, Gaia, for the sake of the old times, can't you just let them go? No. This one thing she wasn't going to compromise on. Someone had to pay, if not the world, if not the humans and all living things. Then the remaining gods. You have slaughtered so many. Is it not enough? No, these were servants, powerless and willless things created by those who didn't have the strength to force real creation to begin, and yet you killed them all. Even the little ones. They opposed me, Gangria insisted. They were trying to stall. You hunted them down like animals. At least don't lie to yourself. You are not me. Then what I am, sister? Gangria shook her head, refusing to answer. Distractions. She shouldn't waste these minutes. Yet, at the same moment, it wasn't true. There was all the time in the world. Up here, the cruel river of now slowed its speed to a mere trickle. Gangria glanced at her body. It was an avatar, sculpted from faith and resonance between how Beastkin and the monsters saw her. Cruel fangs and claws attached to a lithe, beautiful body. Heterochromic eyes and a face one would kill for, with a glint of endless cruelty hidden beneath. An apex predator and a compassionate goddess at the same time, still retaining the duality of her past. Distractions! She didn't want to cross this boundary, but there was no other choice. There always is a choice, whispered other her. No, it was not true. If not this catharsis, this sacrifice, she would never be herself. You already aren't. With a steel in her step, she entered the deepest reaches of heaven. The opulence faded, leaving indents of sadness and despair, instead of the surety that gold and ivory had imparted earlier. A man stood there, clad in delicate armor, with his visor open, a youthful, scholarly face peeked from the metal, his face full of melancholy. Sword and shield at his side were kept at the ready, and yet his gaze was hollow. Can we not do it, Gaia? He asked calmly. I had thrown that identity away, Brighton, and yet I dare not call you any other name. Oh? She grinned with a feral, helpless smile. The mighty leash-holder fears this humble slave? Please. Stop. Gangria was no longer smiling. There was cold hatred under her gaze. Do you remember how I pleaded with you? Do you recall those moments? For decades, centuries, eons. Gangria's voice rose to a maddened scream. All the time you played king and queen up here. I begged. I screamed. I tore apart. And now, you want me to stop? This circle of violence will perpetuate otherwise, he answered quietly. Don't talk to me about violence, you scum. The goddess leashed out, her pupils dilating. You hid here, trying to get out to use me and what was left on this pathetic planet to fuel your escape attempt. I know all about it. What are you... Oh no, Mirabelle. Now you're suddenly smart, eh? Yes, that bitch manipulated you. She played us all, but the sins you committed are your own. Gangria's smile twisted even more. And now that all is made clear, let us dance the grand finale. It didn't have to be this way. It has to be this way. So be it. I'll go down fighting, though. She didn't laugh. Not this time. This fool who once was her best friend deserved better. Sadly, they all had their roles to play in this tragedy. Hours later, Aeon found her crying and laughing at the same time. She was clutching the heads of two gods, their faces frozen in an endless scream. Their story was now complete. Gangria was free, but at what cost? The ghost of a kinder time wondered. Epilogue 3, Recalculation. High above Yana, space contorted as something slipped through the endless void, a trace of divinity slowly expanding, from a blinking light into a small sphere and then a humanoid figure. The thing stretched and hummed as it took shape, muttering aloud, even if nobody was around to hear its woes. Should I use the historical devil form? Or maybe he didn't abandon his naivety and an angel would suffice. Ah, but there are some gods out here, aren't they? It's unlikely they didn't have contact, so the cat should be out of the eldritch bag. He grinned. I wonder what happened. It's the weight that makes the meal so delicious. Maybe, yes, that form should be good enough. To remind him of his earth, of his past, because no matter what kind of tragedy one endured, they always yearn for better times, for the past, for home. Despite the vacuum of space, the being's words could be clearly heard, if there were only someone out here to hear them. But there were none, and the skies were empty. Ignoring this, the cutout blinked out, and suddenly a man appeared, floating in space, clad in a two-part suit, wearing an old-fashioned cylinder with a small goatee and smug, sharp face. To finish it off, he summoned a tasteful cane, twirling it delightfully in his hands. Already, now it should be about now. As he spoke, the darkness twisted, coalescing into a light similar to his own. Then, with a pop, a figure appeared near him, her sharp eyes taking him all in. The newcomer was a stately woman in a white dress, with golden hair and irises. She glared at the black-clad man before speaking out. "Here you are, Pydell. Probably once again up to no good?" Her face contorted with hatred. "What are you doing out here at the end of nowhere?" "It's you, Alice, or was it Grace? You angels look all the same from whatever angle I see you." "Answer the question, monster!" "Tsk, tsk. What's with all the unfriendliness? I'm the one fixing your mistakes, cleaning after you, incompetent lot, if you wish to be vulgar. And these are the thanks I get?" Pydell scoffed playfully, his black, onyx-like eyes never leaving his companion's face. "You mean scamming poor souls out of their karma, breaking the balance? That's the kind of thing you're playing at." "Your accusations truly hurt me, my dear." He smiled. "It's not like you have any proof, right?" The grin grew even larger. "After all, if it were any different, you would want to devour me immediately, right? Shut it. No fun." Pydell shrugged. "That's why I prefer mortal women. They are more true to their desires." "Do you really want to get beaten up?" the angel threatened. "Sheesh. I'm just waiting for a transaction to finish up. No need to get angry." He took out an old-fashioned circular timepiece. "Right about now." The clock hands ticked another minute, and nothing happened. "Huh? I'm rarely wrong. Then if the stars align differently... now..." The silence followed. "Now I'm curious. What happened? I'm growing worried." "Wipe that perverted smile off your face." "But don't you grow hot when something unexpected happens?" The black-clad man grinned madly, bits of saliva starting to drip down his chin. "It's so delicious when the universe just won't cooperate. Don't you think, my dear?" "Stay away from me. Just check what you want to check and let's leave." The angel grew visibly uncomfortable at the sight of her adversary in a state best described as arousal. But I want to savor this moment. It could be the only one I get in centuries. "Do it or I'll check myself." "Don't you dare." Pydell grew agitated, his form changing and twisting. A tail grew out, then a few dozen horns appeared on his head, creating a makeshift crown. After that, 2 more pairs of arms appeared, more brutish and inhuman than his earlier form. "Hi!" The angel fell back on her butt, and even when floating, she started to scramble, desperately trying to get away. Looking down at her, Pydell reined in his temper, returning to a calmer visage, and yet the damage was done. The girl's eyes were wide and full of tears. "Ahem. Pardon. I took it a bit too far." He glanced at the trembling angel while straightening his back. A tired sigh left his mouth. "Another one broken," he murmured.
Be gone.
"What?" The blonde girl didn't manage to speak another word before being sucked into a suddenly appearing vortex. Then the crack in reality stabilized, and a moment later, something spoke out of it in a humorless tone. "You irreplaceably damaged another one." "Zoe, I sometimes can't control my powers." "That's unlikely. Has something changed?" "Oh, that's an understatement." "An anomaly appeared?" "Probably. Now to check which type." "Do you need assistance?" "Of course not." Pydell shook a finger. "Don't be a killjoy. It will be fun. I feel it." There were a few seconds of silence as the crack responded, "Do as you wish. I will return and report. Also, it will be some time before I'm able to find another rookie to assist you. Don't break her as fast." "Yeah, yeah. Chill. Goodbye." The darkness disappeared as Pydal murmured under his nose. "Always boring," he shrugged. "At least I know how to have fun. Now, show me what happened here, Akashic Archive." The next hours were filled with mad giggles, screaming, and a lot of saliva. Pydal was twirling around in space while having a fit of his life. When it ended, his gaze was profound as he looked over the world below. "Uno, Charles, Aeon." "That's quite a journey. Good for you, man, good for you. To break bonds of karma is no light thing." "I came for a hero, or for a monster. Really, there's not much difference between them, no matter what people say. And here I get neither. Astounding. Now, with new variables, we should see each other in like 20,000 years. That's a respectable run for a freshly crowned god, or a demigod, whatever." And Paydel's face grew blissful. "Who knows? Maybe you'll give me a surprise." Again, he slurped. "I'm always looking for new talent." "Let's wait and see if you have what it takes to join us, to join the fallen angels." His face turned nearly fatherly. "After all, we have all the time in the world to experiment and just live in this sad, abandoned universe. Ciao, Aeon." With these words, he disappeared into the darkness. Deep below, the one called Aeon was having his hands full. Being a god was not easy.